Hi, everybody. It's Bibliovino back here today with some more book tastings. I'm so excited. It's been a little while since I've been with you, but this month I have two, maybe three book tastings coming up. I'm really excited about all of them. And today I'm going to be talking to debut novelist Marie Wishart about her novel Ignite. So she's going to be joining me in just a second, and we'll be talking about that. If you have a novel that's coming out and you'd like to come in and talk with me, do a little one-on-one, I would love to have you do that and get you some publicity for your books. I've been so grateful to the Bookstagram community for just embracing me and embracing these authors. My guest today actually does a lot of Instagram. She does some author interviews as well, so I'm excited to talk to her about her experience with that. It's one of my very favorite things to do, so I'm sure we can compare notes on that. Hopefully she's going to be in here in just a second. Later on this month, I'm going to be talking to Paula Braxton. I'm really excited about speaking with her because she's got this great series that I've been reading, and the next book in that series, City of Time and Magic, is coming out next week. So next Saturday, I'll be speaking with her. So if you haven't heard from Paula Braxton or you don't know about her or her series, it's really great. She also has several other series that usually has a kind of a magical bent to it. So I'm excited to look at some of her other stuff as well. This one was really great and I've enjoyed it a lot. I also may have a third author that I'll be talking to this month, so it's a little bit busy, but that's how I like it, so that's awesome. I'm going to be talking to Marie about her book. It's called Ignite. I'm actually partnering with her and Book and Wine Lovers Marketing to get this out to you today. They are great to work with, new and upcoming authors, indie authors, so I'm really excited for you to hear about her story coming to write this book. I haven't seen her join yet, so that's fine. I'm just going to keep on talking. Oh, there she is. There's Marie. So Marie, hopefully there's a button that says request to join. If not, I think I can add you or send you an invite. Let's see. Click on that. Oh, yes. Okay. I think we're about to have it. You never know. Hello.
Hello.
How are you?
I'm very good, thank you. How are you?
Great. Thanks. I'm so glad we got to talk today.
I am too. I was so excited to do this.
Yay! I know that you also do some author interviews on your own Instagram, so you know the thrill of just being able to talk to somebody about their creative process. So I'm really excited to do that with you today.
Oh, yay. I love your platform. I love all of your wine themes. I'm like, yes, this is it's
Yeah. It's the best marriage, wine and books. Great. I would love for readers to get a little bit of a taste of your book. This is a debut novel for you, so a lot of readers are not familiar with you, so I want to make sure that they have a chance to hear a little bit of your writing. So if you wouldn't mind reading just a little bit of an excerpt for us, that would be awesome.
Oh, well, let me grab that and I can do this.
That's great. That's awesome.
So I'm actually just going to start at the beginning because this is just one of those books that there are days in our winters where the temperatures drop to dangerously low levels, despite the sun shining like flames burning up in the sky. On these days, the sun rays reach forth and penetrate prisms of diamond dust scattered at low levels in the atmosphere, melting and deflecting instead of penetrating earth and life. They refract horizontally and project arcs of brilliant light known as sundogs, reminiscent of two rainbows with one bright red beam initiating the pattern, then convalescing outwardly through the expected spectrum of change: red, orange, yellow, green, blue, indigo, violet. But these arcs are not rainbows. They are much denser in form, so individual colors are never seen. The arcs span broad widths and possess a center white flare, as if they themselves are capable of luminescence. The effect is positively ethereal. On these phantom days, the presence of the sun does not prophesize warmth and life and all of the things associated with properly projected sun rays. Rather, it prophesies something frigid and maleficent is in the air. On these perfectly clear days, when the sun rays pass through ice crystals and warp, reconstructing in a panoramic fresco hung in the sky, I am acutely aware that it is fucking cold. But on these days, I am also reminded of another truth. Even though everything is suspended and everything is crystallized and it is fucking cold, there can still be transcendental beauty and wonder and awe. I find peace in that. So
I love that introduction to the book. I love that we get that sort of, imagery of just how goddamn cold it is in Fargo, North Dakota. Like, we all know still, like, that idea of the fact that, yeah, the sun is shining, but that doesn't mean shit. Like, it is terribly cold.
It's so mean. I'm like, look at how bright and brilliant it is. And you walk outside and you're like, my face hurts. Like, it just, the kind of cold that takes your breath away. And that was just kind of, I wanted to put people right in the setting and right in the mindset of like the juxtaposition of this awful, like this awesome beauty that means awful things, and how they kind of go hand in hand, and like just that whole, yeah.
Yeah, that's awesome. And I don't know that I've ever seen a sundog before. We don't get a whole lot of snow where I am, so I feel like I probably haven't had the chance to see that. But maybe I have, and I just don't know what I'm looking at.
Where are you at?
I'm in Pecos, Texas, which is in like the armpit of Texas. We're kind of in the desert, so we don't get a lot of precipitation at all. We did get a lot of snow, though, when we had that like snowpocalypse last year. That was the weirdest thing. And that's the most snow that, or for the longest duration that I've ever seen where I live.
Yeah. And you guys do not have the infrastructure for that. That was insane.
Yeah. No, it was absolutely crazy. And like I said, it wasn't the snow or the ice necessarily that did us in. It was that because we had those 2 or 3 days where it was very icy, and our water froze at the treatment plant, then what we couldn't get our water treated. So we actually had to boil water then for a couple of weeks after, because there was no way to treat the water when the electricity was down and all those things. So it was crazy.
Huh. Yep. The weather. They just, natural disasters and all of that. It's wonderful and amazing, and it really makes us sort of aware of our little place in this world and how a little control we have over it.
Absolutely. Yes. But you did a great job painting a picture of what it's like in Fargo, but you actually have several locations in the book, and you do a really great job of giving us kind of the feel and flavor of each place where you're at. Even in Chicago in a hotel. I mean, like, we don't get to see a lot of Chicago, but we do get a real feeling for like the environment that she's in. And that's dictated a lot by the people in that situation. But then you take us to Washington, D.C., and we really get Washington, D.C. as kind of a character in the book.
I love that you say that. There was just this like poetic sense of Washington, D.C. I wanted people to develop a love for it. And when I was writing this, I was going to Washington, D.C. all of the time. And it felt like, yeah, I kind of wanted it to be like a character almost. Because when you go there, everything changes. It just, yeah, thank you.
Yeah. No, and it was beautiful. And I feel like, we got to see kind of the majesty of, the monuments and the cemetery and all of those things, but also just, the human tapestry of it too, because you take us into like Georgetown and we see, kind of the nightlife and stuff like that. So we got both sides of that, because obviously Washington, D.C. is probably a city in contrast in a lot of ways, because not all of those things happening in one place.
If you go there as a tourist and you only do the touristy things, there's just like the surface level that you get. But then when you start like sticking your nose in all of these other little hidden places, there's this whole other life. And running in Washington, D.C., it is still hands down my favorite place. You just feel like you're inside a whole like environment that's different.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I feel like, if you're seeing the city in that way, then you're not limited to where streets go and transportation can get you.
Yeah, absolutely. Or biking. If you ever go to Washington, D.C., rent one of those timeshare bikes. Just do it. Like, it transports you.
Yeah, and so I do want to talk to you about running. That is not one of the things that I enjoy doing, but clearly you and the character in this book have a real affinity for it. How did you get started in running?
I actually started running later in life. I was in dental school when I really, really got into it. And it was definitely a coping mechanism. It was like, I got to get away from here. And how do I do that? I'm going to just put on my shoes, get out the door, see how far away I can get. We had this, it was Moose Tower in downtown Minneapolis. And you could see the building from anywhere. So I would try to like get far away and then see the building and be like, okay, it's still there. And now I go back. But at this point, I would run, and you think so much. It's just this mental clarity that you get when you're running. So I would write scenes in my head, and I would have all of these, ideas. And so I loved putting that into the book so that you could kind of get this sense of how much that grounded her. Another one of my favorite lines was like, I needed my feet to connect the ground to remind me that it was still there. Like running it's centering, it's clarity.
I'm gonna have to take your word for it because
So running is awful.
I
love if you see me running, stop whatever's chasing me.
And you actually you're a triathlete, so you don't actually just run, but you also do the swimming and biking that goes along with it. My second husband was a triathlete, and he tried to recruit me, and I did not cotton to that real well. But especially because the seat on the bike was the most painful experience of my life. And apparently it's like bad form to have a really nice bike, but one of those like bucket seats that actually holds your butt. And I was like, I don't think I can do this.
There's so much padding in those shorts. When I first got into cycling, I was like, I'm not wearing biking shorts. Those look ridiculous. And then I did like a 20-mile ride, and I was like, okay, give me the shorts, give me all of the padding. And
yeah, it's so painful.
Yeah, it is. You have to love cycling a lot. Cycling is probably my first love, to be honest. But coming from Minnesota, like cycling wasn't something I did growing up.
Right. Yeah. A lot of skiing, a lot of snowshoeing, not so much cycling.
Exactly. Yeah.
So have you done your half marathon and your half Ironman and your Ironman yet? Have you tackled those things?
Yeah. So I did a half Ironman a couple weeks ago. I have a full Ironman coming up next week. Once you get into it, it does become this like addiction. You just sort of are like, I got to keep ramping up. And then you do one race, and my husband and I both did a half Ironman. Like the first time we did a race together. And then afterwards we went to a restaurant, ordered a bunch of food, and we sat and looked at each other and we're like, why do we do this shit? Like we started planning all of the other dumb activities that we could do with our lives. Like, I need to write more. Let's start underwater basket weaving and painting small circles. We're like, no, we're never doing this again. And then the next morning we woke up and signed up for a full Ironman. I mean, there's this amnesia, you just.
It's like childbirth.
Yes, exactly. I don't know why we have multiple children. You forget.
You forget, clearly. Yes. Well, I was also going to talk to you a little bit about the family dynamics in the story. Obviously, a lot of the book is at least tangentially autobiographical for you. But I hope that you did not go through all of the turmoil character does. But I think we all have, those different things in our lives with our family that are difficult, or that you have to kind of work through. The idea of like parents aging and all of those things, and then just the ideas of the of the character in her marriage, and how it was supposed to be so easy that she wasn't in love with her husband, and it ends up being very, very hard.
Yes. Yeah, I love how you say that. It was just one of those things where, when a book can be your best friend, I was looking for that kind of book. I needed that book at that point in my life, which is why when I sat down, I'm like, I want to put these characters on page, and I want to show that side of a relationship and love and life. And, it's so hard to go through all of those things and talk to people about them. So, getting it in a book and seeing it on page and letting it be real and letting it come to life. Because it's not the kind of thing that makes sense to people. You don't hear those love stories all that often. So, it was very different.
Yeah. And I really loved how, I felt this so deeply, like not exactly in the same way, but when she looks at her husband and says, I need you to tell me what's been wrong with me. I need you to say it. And, I have been in that place before where it didn't matter what my feelings were. I just felt like if it wasn't obvious to everyone, it didn't make sense.
Yes, exactly. It's that validation. It's like, am I okay? Yeah, for sure. I love how you say that. And, I wanted it to really show how much she loves her husband, and how much they love each other and are willing to like work together and have these tough conversations, because it's a different kind of suffering to be in love, like, or to love someone and not be in love with someone. And like, how does that affect a person emotionally? Because yeah.
And her coming to the realization that that seemed very practical and simple to her, that she was not in love but loved him very much, and then she has to realize that he probably is in love with her, and so it is not even. And I think she assumed it was even for a long time.
Yeah.
And she has to tell him, like, I love the image of her spreading her arms. I don't love you like this, but I love you like this.
Yes, that was one of my favorite scenes to write, because I was like, how would this go? And how do people navigate that conversation? And that realization, like, okay, you know, for one person to be in that relationship and go through the ups and downs and have all of the love, and then the other person to just be safe, safe, safe. And the way she's like, I'm in my little garden, and you keep me safe, but I am not wild and free the way that I want to be. And the bitterness of a person who says, you get to feel that way, you get to have this emotional love, and I don't get to have that. Like, and letting people feel that, see other people feel that, and be like, it's not selfish to feel that,. Because it's a way of suffering too.
Yeah. And it's not I mean, she's obviously not there, not in that place to hurt him. And I don't think she thought it was ever going to be a place that she came to. I think she truly believed what she told him was that I don't feel that way. I don't have those emotions. When really just, the act of closing them off because of a past hurt. And, kind of, when I look back at like being young and love, and I just think, why didn't someone look at me and say, this means nothing?
Oh my gosh,
You
right.
have life ahead of you. This is so tiny. Let it go. But you just don't feel that when you're at that point.
No, no. And it's just not such a conversation that people feel comfortable having. And so they never get that, like, hello, so a person can just take that and run with it and go to the extremes, and not realize what a simple thing it could really be if you just dealt with it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think too, I try to tell, I teach. And so I try to tell my kids all the time, like, um, you have these emotions that you don't really understand, and you may never understand, because even as adults, we don't always get them. But then you also have these hormones that are magnifying everything. And so when you think you're feeling, when this, it's probably this much feeling that you're having, it's actually magnified to like this much. And you're not able to even understand it, let alone navigate it. And, I just feel like that's such a discussion we don't have with kids. But Romeo and Juliet killed people. Like, this is, it's probably out of proportion.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And that whole, like, in your 20s, for some reason, we have this, it is way more magnified. And then all of a sudden you get into your 30s, and you just sort of level out, and then you start seeing life from a different standpoint. And you just assume, I feel like there's this idea that you're going to be this way, and it's just going to kind of stay. And then you keep going through life, and you're like, oh, wait a second, and another thing, I wanted to kind of put across there, like, you're not going to feel, you gotta give yourself the space to keep evolving as a human being. And I don't, just maybe everybody else knows that, but she doesn't know that.
Well, and two, it's funny because the kids will ask me, about like being old, and I'm like, well, first of all, I'm not.
Oh, excuse
Not,
me. Right.
not old. But I tell them all the time, like, I still feel like I'm in my 20s. Like, I still feel that way. It's been 20 years since that time, but I still have the mindset of someone who is still growing and learning. Like, you don't stop doing that. And when we try to like set people up as being like, they've got it all figured out, like, that's just not true. Um, they might have found a place where they can feel comfortable, and a place where they're making decisions that work for them. But that does not mean that it's going to stay that way, because life comes at you fast, and there's so many things that will change how you're thinking and feeling just like that.
Yeah. Yeah. That is so good. I mean, and that's exactly what she comes to realize is like, oh, I thought I had to just stick. And when you finally are like, what? I can't just stick the course. Like evolution or give me liberty or give me death. Like I need to evolve now. Where her final chapter, when she's like, you know, what I have to remember how it said, but like, can I evolve and become who I need to be for myself without harming what I have, and that question, becomes like the next books in the series is like, okay, how do I move forward and not create a path of destruction in my wake? Like,
Yeah. And she talks about, I think she talks about the difference between like a, well, maybe not. Maybe this is another book I just read, but the difference between like a spinning top, that's isolated from the world, but it's still spinning, and then a whirlpool that's sucking everything in. And maybe that, I think that was a different book.
that's a beautiful visual. I'm like, I wish I used that, but
but the idea, I think not just, I think about like not just women, but I think women in particular have been conditioned and trained that if what they're going to do is going to affect others adversely, they should just not do it.
yes, there is this mindset, and I, it's definitely one of those things where I don't feel like men have that same obligation that is driving them. We are driven by pleasing everyone else around us and making those little, like, our secret desires for a reason. They're meant to be dreams. Dreams stay locked in here, and
Advice to make everyone else happy.
yeah, yeah. It's like our biggest motivating driving force. It's what kind of makes us who we are. And yeah, you have to kind of learn and give yourself permission to ignore the other stuff and say, this is more important. It is, I am me, and it's okay if I hurt somebody. Yeah.
And it's funny too, because I don't remember ever being taught that lesson, but I still, would not break up with people. Like even in high school, I just couldn't break up with people because it might hurt him. I'm like, what did I do that for? Like he will live.
Right. Like, I don't think they have that same, but yeah, you would deny and deny. And then when you finally do stand up for yourself, you feel horrible.
Yeah. And this sort of goes off as like an explosion. It's never, because if I had done it at the first twinge of maybe this isn't for me, it probably would have been fine. But now I've let it go and go and go. And now it's just this huge problem.
Right. Right. Yeah. Yeah. So certainly that should be a class. Like girls should be sitting down with in like the 8th grade and be like, hey,
Listen, you got to do some things for yourself. And that is okay. That is just fine. He will be fine. I promise he will find somebody else probably tomorrow. So I want to talk to you about the idea of a book within a book. Did you know there was going to be a book within a book when you first started?
I had no idea. I sat down to write book 2. That was what I went to do. And that is, basically that the chapter that ends this book really is the beginning of the story. And then she just kind of takes off and goes on this whole like self-discovery. I denied myself all of these things. Yeah, I'm going to go and figure all that out. So that's the book I wrote. And when I got to the final chapters of it and just started reviewing it, I was like, no one is going to understand this. I need to explain what got her here. So then I went back and I was like, okay, where does this begin? And that's when I got to that day, because I thought, it all starts with her finding out that she's pregnant and having this whole experience where she's not going to keep her child, and then she does, and everything that happens after that, because it just kind of changes the whole trajectory of her life. And she just, whatever she had planned on doing, she stopped and she said, I'm going to do all of these things, and I'm going to be this great person, and it's fine. So that, on that day, I just had it correspond with the whole Sundog thing, because there was just so much poetry in that. Like it was an awful thing, and it was a scary thing, and it was a beautiful thing. It was all of that in one. They just kind of like were mirrors of each other. And in writing this story, I had so much fun. It's now, like with the books too, you kind of get a progression of this woman, because she's, it's a memoir experience is really what the whole trilogy is going to be.
Yeah, it definitely reads like in a memoir style, and maybe the second book will be a little bit different because you did have to cover a lot of time.
Yeah.
In this first book, you really did tell her story from the very beginning, and so we get that, quite a long period of time. And then I don't know if like when you get into a shorter period of time in book two, does it read more like a novel, a lot more dialogue, things like that?
Yeah, and you get the dialogue, and then there's actually jumping in like journal entries where she's like, "This is what I'm doing, and this is my plan," and then she keeps moving along. So there's the dialogue that's taking the story, and then there's the moments where she sits down, and says, "Okay, I'm learning, I'm processing, and then moving on." And so it's a whole different style of writing, and that's kind of what I want to is it to be a progression of what you do along this journey. You start here, and you're kind of you don't know. And then book two is okay, I've learned a little bit and I'm embracing new stuff. And I loved Bridget Jones's diary too, just her like flightiness and all of these crazy little things. So I try to throw more stuff into the second book of like, okay, she's researching, she's getting on Google, she's like, okay, what am I learning? What are other people doing about this? And reading other things and pulling that all in. So that's all, in the second book. Whereas this one is most of, it's supposed to be kind of like a simple little story.
Yeah, I mean, it's history. It's definitely a history of what brought her to that point. And there's a lot, obviously, and you, I mean, as you were saying, like you wrote sort of a book two where you thought what the story was, and you were like, oh, wait, no, I've got actually a book one I need to do. And then you probably could have written like a book point five where you got through her childhood.
I know. So honestly, this book has been through a lot of evolutions. And I go back and whatever I would say to readers right now about Ignite specifically is power through the first 7 chapters, get to Chicago. Once she gets to Chicago, then the whole story just takes off. But you have to get there because you got to understand what's going on with their mindset. And it's so condensed. I had to just try to make it really small. Before that, I had actually worked with a woman for a couple years, or no, for a year. I worked with her for a year a couple years ago, and she wanted me to put this all into one story. And she wanted me to write my whole backstory. So I had actually a 4-part book, and the part one was her whole life backstory. And when I went, I didn't like what we made. I didn't like the end product. And so in quarantine, I finally was like, you know what, I'm going to sit down and I'm going to fix it and I'm going to do what I envisioned. So then I took the parts that we had written and kind of condensed it all to make the entry to this book. It's been through a lot of revisions.
Yeah, and I feel like when you first think about I'm going to write a book, you're like I'm going to sit down, I'm going to start with chapter one, and then like in a month I'm going to have a whole book, and
Right.
it never works out that way.
Years and years and years later, then you have to stick to it. Like a stick-to-itiveness kind of mindset is essential if you're going to be a writer, because you are going to go through the emotional gamut of life experience. Oh, yeah. I never would have believed I was going to get to this point back then, nor would I have embarked so like ambitiously. I think if somebody would have told me what this was going to take, I probably would have been like, oh no, kill me. There's so much work.
Yeah, so because it wasn't just the writing of it, obviously, because that took you a long time. You had a lot of things to go through. And then, I've heard your story about your publication and how it just kept going on and on and on. And the idea of rejection letters to me is just like, yeah, no, that's enough to keep me from trying. That's fine.
The rejection, I mean, I'm finally at the point now where I'm like, you know what? I love what I've done. And I've had readers reach out and be like, oh my gosh, this is my story. And how did you know what I was feeling? And that validation finally set me free to say, I am never going to be right for most people. I'm going to be right for a handful of people. And that's all that matters to me. So, but gosh, that was an evolution in and of itself of a human.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that, unfortunately, like it's hard to get into the minds of those few people. You still have to do all of the publicity and the things so that you can find those few people that go, oh my gosh, yes, this is the story that I needed to read. But I think women's fiction is definitely in a place, right now that's so much more broad, as we start to figure out things about like ourselves and about like, our feminism and our place in the world. Like we're able to to find these writers, fortunately, who are putting these things down, you know, not just what they're feeling, but what we're feeling as like a generation and like as a whole culture of women, that you know we're finally able to sort of voice some of these things. And so with writers like you that are coming out and putting it on paper, it gives us a way to connect over those things too.
Yes, that, and you know, just this online community in and of itself has changed the whole face of writing. And now, you know, it is so hard. And I read books written by like Cheryl Strayed and Lydia Yuknovich and all of these people who are just like these phenomenal writers, and they are published. They are traditionally published, and you know, you hear them talk about what is cliche and what can't be said, and how their editors tell them this doesn't sell. We don't talk about this anymore. It's not, you know, it's no longer relevant. Well, it's relevant to somebody. And I'm actually really proud to be independent, because all I'm saying is what is really genuinely in my heart and what I want to say. And yes, I get that I could be cliche, and I understand that there are some very, you know, right and proper literary geniuses out there who would tell me all of the things that ways that I'm wrong, but that doesn't matter because it's those little ways in which I'm right that I'm going to cling to.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that again, in an online with an online forum like this, and with book talk and things like that, you are getting a chance for as indie authors to put your stuff out there in a whole different and more broad way than indie authors ever had the option of doing before.
Even when I first started this thing, you know, Instagram was just this little tiny thing where we put a couple pictures on there. Where Instagram now is where all of these authors are, and I see it's really happening. Indie authors are making it all of the time. We're getting audiences because we can connect and really communicate, which is, I think 10 years from now, it's going to be a whole new marketplace.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Well, I am super happy to be in on that trend with you right now today. So I thank you so much for coming in and talking to me, and just best of luck with book 2 and book 3 coming out, and whatever else you set your sail to as you go into your career as an author. And obviously, I hope your dentistry goes well too.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I really appreciate this. You had the greatest questions and dialogue, and I love that you felt the story. That means so much to me.
Thank you so much. I hope you have a wonderful rest of your week, and thank everybody for tuning in today. I will be doing another one of these book tastings on Saturday with Paula Braxton, so I hope you'll tune in then too. Thanks so much.
Thank you.